Well, a very good morning once again from the sports desk. South Africa's Dricus du Plessis will be involved in what is probably going to be the biggest fight of his UFC career so far, and that's when he takes on Australian Robert Whittaker at UFC 290. It's happening in Las Vegas, and it's happening in the early hours of Sunday morning. Du Plessis going into this contest as the underdog, with Whittaker the overwhelming favorite for victory, especially given his UFC experience and du Plessis' inexperience. Another South African, Cameron Simon, will be fighting against Terence Mitchell. That's in the bantamweight. We are joined in studio by renowned MMA commentator Simon Stevens to help us unpack, of course, what is set to transpire, or at least what we expect to transpire from midnight tonight out in Las Vegas. Simon, a very good morning to you. Always a pleasure seeing you. So we're going to start off with Cameron Simon. He's taking on Terence Mitchell. He was supposed to have taken Rodriguez, but Christian Rodriguez, that is, and he pulled out. Probably he's going to be glad that he pulled out, because if word of who and what Cameron Simon is to be gone on, we've got our friend Terence Mitchell in a bit of trouble. Just talk to us about, firstly, about Simon himself. I mean, what can we expect from this bantamweight talent?
Well, there's a reason why UFC President Dana White called Cameron Simon the future. You know, when the head of a $7 billion business says this young South African kid from Pretoria is the future of our sport, you got to stand up and listen to him. He's the all-round mixed martial artist. I think there's a new generation MMA that's it's kind of unseen. It's like a lot of combat sports athletes like Dricus du Plessis, for example, started in kickboxing, and when fighters from different combat sports codes move into MMA, they learn how to grapple, they learn jiu-jitsu, they learn kickboxing, they learn to have that entire skill set. Cameron Simon grew up just with MMA. He didn't enter mixed martial arts from a boxing background or just a grappling background. He started as a young man in Pretoria, as a young kid, as a protege of Dricus du Plessis after going to early EFC fights. He is an all-rounded package. Everything that CIT do with Dricus du Plessis' career, from the media to the training to who they bring into the fight camp, their sparring partners, who their managers are, that whole kind of blueprint that they've got around Dricus, they are now applying to Cameron Simon and perfecting it. Everything that Dricus du Plessis is going on to achieve in his career, and I still think he's going to be achieving great things, including the World Championship, you can times that by 10 by Cameron Simon, because the kid is the real deal. He does everything so perfectly. Technically, mentally, spiritually, he is one of the best fighters I think we'll ever see coming out of South Africa. And
is that perhaps what makes him the best mentee for Dricus du Plessis? Because Dricus is a fighter. He's a I do not give up. I'm going to pummel you until you submit, and that could potentially be what Robert Whittaker needs to worry about, is that Dricus does not give up. Dricus does not stop. There is no point where he considers that, you know what, perhaps this is just not my fight. That speaks to the mentality that he is now essentially imparting onto a Cameron Simon. Dricus du Plessis, going in as an underdog, does he even recognize that kind of title?
No. And Morena, you put it perfectly. He does not know how to quit. The athleticism of Dricus du Plessis allows him to always hit back with power, regardless of how in danger he is. We've seen him fight so many times in the UFC and other promotions, whether it's KSW against Soldich or in the EFC. When he's on the back foot, he's gassed, he's drained, he's in deep, deep waters, and he's in trouble. That left hook still has so much power, and I think that's what puts a lot of people off. You see it in a lot of the UFC fight. You saw it in the Brad Tavares fight, you saw it in the Brunson fight, you saw it in the second round against Darren Till. When they're looking at Dricus and thinking, how do I put this guy away? He's still got so much power and so much athleticism as a middleweight. They don't know how to put him away. And the danger for Robert Whittaker tonight against du Plessis, as you put it directly, du Plessis can bite down on his gum shield and keep coming forward. Now, Robert Whittaker has not won by a finish in the past 9 years. Don't forget even losing to Adesanya those twice in the past 8 years. But Robert Whittaker has not been able to finish an opponent in 8 or 9 years. And Dricus du Plessis is exactly that kind of fighter who you need to finish. You need to put him away, because he'll start coming back in the later rounds and he's really going to hurt you. And that's what I see happening tonight in Vegas.
This is something that you had spoken at length about off air before we had come on into the studio, is that nobody wants to see another Whittaker-Israel Adesanya fight. And at the moment, Israel Adesanya is the guy that a lot of people want to be taking on, especially given some of the out-of-ring smack talk that he's been sharing, especially with, he's even coming after kids now, Israel Adesanya.
Yes.
But people want to see an African fight. I mean, yes, he recognizes as a New Zealander, but people do want to see an African fight, especially considering the smack talk that the two have been having.
Yeah.
That motivation, will that potentially be the ace up Dricus' sleeve to say that a lot of people want to see Africans going at each other, since now we don't have like a Francis Ngannou? Is that the fight that people want to see? And what is the reality of it potentially happening?
I don't think the UFC want to see a third Adesanya Whittaker fight. I think it's a difficult one to market, as we've seen it before. I don't think we're going to see anything new from those two fighters, where Dricus to Plessis is an unknown, not just to us as South African fight fans, but around the world. And they always, excuse me, they always sleep on his wrestling. This week, during Fight Week, for International Fight Week, for UFC 290, Dricus was saying how great it would be to have the Adesanya fight in Africa. Adesanya wants it in Australia. I know the UFC are trying to market towards having it in Sydney. Whittaker wants to fight on that card as well, regardless of the outcome here tomorrow night. Dricus is saying it's time to have it in Africa. When I spoke to Israel Adesanya for International Fight Week about 3 or 4 years ago and asked him, at what point are you going to fight in Africa, on the continent, with it in West Africa, because his roots are Nigerian, or in Cape Town or Pretoria, he said it's inevitable. And that's exactly what Adesanya said to me. He says, Simon, it's inevitable. I will fight and defend my belt in Africa. The time is perfect. We've been talking to the UFC so many years now about putting on in Africa. The market has proven itself again and again. We've got title fights coming to the EFC on Thursday next week, for example. It's ripe for the taking. And Dricus du Plessis is pushing the point in the best way he can. And that's why I'm sleeping Robert Whittaker in the second round tonight.
It is happening in the early hours, in fact, of Sunday morning. That is UFC 290 happening out in Las Vegas. And we are, at least from a South African point of view, hoping that the Australian will be floored, potentially with a knockout, and that we will finally see an Israel Adesanya Dricus du Plessis fight, and that Dricus really shows exactly, for those who may not know, who he is, especially on that UFC circuit. Simon Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. We can expect, of course, more commentary from Simon very soon, because there's quite a lot that will be discussed. And one of those things that will be discussed very soon is the PFL. That's the one that has roped in former UFC champion Francis Ngannou. That's where we leave it from the sports desk for now.